So Valeriu, thank you very much for joining this initiative to discuss the lack of trust in our countries globally, actually. Yeah, now we hear about that very much, I guess, and read about that, talk about that. And when I was thinking about doing interview with international experts about trust, I guess my biggest thought was about like my own experience. It was more about even losing trust in words, because with very active social media and everyone having access to microphone, which is actually a very good thing, but I guess we are kind of losing the ability of using words, because like my feeling was that you can't find the right word or like communicate your thoughts, because there are already groups of thoughts, like, or groups of people of similar thoughts, and the groups are very inclined to sterilize their environment. Like, you don't always meet the willingness to listen to the opinion that is not meeting yours. And I think I'm very happy that we have you as an expert that is actually in the position of talking from the perspective of researcher, public policy analyst, and also involved in media. Media, I guess, takes a big part in this hard time in trust relations between society, CSOs, and the government. So yeah, please tell us about media's position, about overall crisis of trust if you see anything in your country, and overall tell us about Moldova, how the things are there, the relations, communication, trust between CSOs, media, and governmental institutions.
Well, thank you, Alina. First of all, thank you for appreciation. I hope that I can really contribute to your research. Obviously, I will speak mainly from the perspective of my own country, of Moldova. I think every country has its local specific of this general crisis of trust, but the components, the amplifiers are more or less similar in different countries. In case of Moldova, the lack of trust in the state, I would separate the perception of state as something more general, the government or the political power in a specific moment. It impacts one on each other. For example, we are following the opinion polls, and we see that we can achieve very quick changes in the level of trust for different public institutions, depending on the change of leadership. So here, actually, at least in our region, in Eastern Europe, the personalities, the role of personality is very important. So the role of the leadership, and actually it is completing one another. So the level of trust and the image of the leader of a specific institution transmits to the institution and vice versa. So, for example, we've seen a quick change of the level of trust in the president of the country, for example, depending on who is the president. This is obvious because this is a very personal institution. But including, for example, the government. After the elections, with the new government in office, the level of trust of people raised dramatically. But still, the general negative attitude toward the government as an institution remained. So this is not comparable to the president. The same situation is with the parliament, where, for example, the ruling party achieved even a bigger victory in elections comparative to the president. But even though we have a clear majority and the absolute majority of people voted for this majority in the parliament. The level of trust in the parliament increased a little bit, but still remains very low comparative to the president of the country, for example, or to traditional institutions like army or church. So this is part of this international puzzle of the lack of trust in the state institutions, with its specific in the post-Soviet region. And this is the mix of the late Soviet time, when the absolute majority of people understood that all this picture projected by the government, by the state, actually is a fake, and the official rhetoric of the state institutions had nothing to do with the reality and with the real goals of the leadership and of these institutions, and that influenced the lack of trust in the government. And next, it was a very complicated period of 90s, and in some countries it is even prolonged, so-called period of transition, when people started to understand, and actually in practically all post-Soviet countries, it was absolutely true that the government is actually that crook which steals your money, which steals your opportunities, and when you meet the state, I mean state institutions like police, justice system, or I don't know, the regulatory bodies, fiscal service, or any other public services. So you most probably will have troubles, and they are not going to help you. They most probably are going to hurt you and to just, let's say, to steal your money or to extort your money. So this is another important cultural layer in the perception of the state. This is the local specific of our region. In case of the wide spreading of internet, I cannot say it added a lot. It mainly contributed to the publicity of this attitude. And I think that in case of pandemic and vaccination, it is probably the best manifestation. But anyway, we don't need to exclude the factor of the weakness of the state institutions. The lack of capacity to communicate, to explain to people, to achieve enough institutional and human capacity for every institution to make it possible to show people the real work you do, to explain why it is important, why are you doing specific things, to show enough transparency, including simple instruments, because many institutions are not enough transparent simply because they don't have enough people who can take care of all these transparency procedures. So this is our experience, and I think those are the main factors which impact on this lack of trust in the state institutions.
Yeah, thank you very much, Valeriu. Yeah, it's interesting that yesterday we were talking about almost the same topic with a Georgian expert, Georgi Melashvili, and he was also very convincing that actually the lack of trust towards the government in post-Soviet area is not something new. It hasn't been there for long years. And it is interesting that you touched upon the communication, and also that it's not just about people not trusting, but also the institutions themselves are not always transparent or skillful in communication, or just logistically, and the capacity is not that big to be really trustworthy. And
Yeah, it is not enough to make a website. You need to have someone who will upload the information there, and it takes time. You need to train someone, and not necessarily, especially if we are speaking about small, let's say, local institutions, local authorities, like a village, the council, or the whole of one small village. So you need to have someone enough skilled. This person need to have time to scan the documents, or to prepare the electronic versions, to know how to upload that, and to keep this procedure, and to do that every time. And it takes time. Most probably they don't have the specific budget for that. And even if they would like to be more transparent, they simply cannot do it. So it is important also to introduce the achievable policies of transparency. For example, in case of Moldova, we have some legal provisions which are obviously exaggerated and not possible to be implemented. So the bad news in this case is that if an institution cannot follow a part of this law about transparency, they don't follow the entire law. So the policies of transparency need to be adequate.
Yeah, but like I have an impression that especially in post-Soviet countries, or the countries that are developing new democracy, or economically they are new developing countries, well, maybe even Western countries, developed countries, they are kind of slow in the development and adopting to the new reality. Well, as you said, in many countries, especially in local governance, there can be lack of capacity for scanning a document and guaranteeing all the transparency and being communication. And meanwhile, in social media, there are people in these big corporations or particular media, or people working for particular interests that are very skillful, and they can, or the troll institute or troll culture, they can, like, while you are doing little steps to strengthening your government or local government, there are parties that are very fast, and we kind of can't catch up with this new media communication style, and people get even more confused with this different anti or pro-propagandas. So how do you think we need to, like, governmental institutions need to catch up with this progress, and what shall we do to really be able to trust to each other, not only individually when we are in face-to-face relations, but also as institutions, as people being in virtual space, just like avatars, or
Well, first and best is obviously that the recommendation for every institution to simply do their job honestly and with a high level of integrity. This is the best, actually. So you cannot substitute the lack of results and the lack of integrity, or the lack of capacity to do things with the good PR. So you can engage, I don't know, the best PR experts, strategies, but if you don't have what to communicate, it will mean actually the propaganda and manipulation of the opinion of people, which can work sometime, but will not work on the long term. So this is actually the best things to do honestly the work they were engaged or elected for. Second, obviously they need to create also especially on local level, people need to pay some attention on transparency. I mean, in the executive branch of and in the local councils where they exist, for transparency. So some basic issues like posting on Facebook, but it will never work if it is only, you know, volunteer work based. It doesn't work. So that need to be part, at least you need to have someone part-time in the office of the mayor, or doesn't matter where, who is dealing with that every time. It is true that for many institutions it's not easy, especially on the local level in the regions with the high intensity of migration of the young working power, which is the case in the majority of the post-Soviet countries, especially in rural areas. It's really not easy to find young specialists at all, but young, well-skilled specialists for not high salaries is practically impossible to find. So one important thing to be addressed is actually the capacity and the structure of the administration. Doesn't matter on central, but especially on local level. In many countries, we have this exaggeratedly fragmented local administration, and with the very small capacity and diversity. So, for example, this is the case in Moldova, for instance, when the local administration in every village has only very few employees who cover some basic issues for very small population. So it's quite not efficient. It's not real. So, and the pressure for any, you know, communication transparency is practically on the mayor or on the secretary of the local council. And if they want, they do that. If they don't want, they don't do it. It depends on, obviously it has a political impact. So if the mayor is thinking every time about next elections, so he or she will work more on the transparency, on communication with people. If not, then not, and they will start to do something only before elections. It is even not possible to cover this part of communication in the existing structure of local administration, at least in Moldova. In the same time, even we have this lack of capacity on the local level, but the level of trust in the local administrations, especially in the mayors, are much higher than in central administrations, which have money, including from the international support for communication. But very often, and for example, we are also working to provide some assistance, somewhere on volunteer base, for some ministries to communicate. And it is good to have consultants and experts who can help you with planning of the public communication and so on. But we cannot substitute the lack of willing of the head of the ministry, for example, to communicate, to be transparent, to understand that this is really important, and to keep discipline in the communication is very important, because any mistake can be extracted from a context and transformed in conspiracy, in fake news, when we know that very well. It is definitely not only the case of Eastern Europe, it's widely spread in the whole world. Even in the countries with the high level of control of social media and so on, we had a relatively recent case in China, where even a state-owned newspaper spread the fake news without understanding that this is a fake news, and next they now don't know how to stop it. It's related on the potential military conflict with Taiwan. So on the central level, the institutions first, as I told, they need to do the right things. They need to do the things they promised before to be elected. And second is to understand that communication is a normal process. So as much transparency as is possible, to understand that the journalists are not enemies, even if you have journalists who you know very well are working for propaganda channels or are funded and owned by the political opponents or by foreign powers, but you need to keep communicate with all normally, and that will pay back in a very short time if you simply keep some rules. That means discipline, procedure, and transparency. As much transparency as possible. This really helps to increase the level of people's trust in the institution.
Thank you very much, Valeriu. I guess I will have the last question, which might be, I don't know how easy it will be to respond right away, but take your time. So what do you think? What is the most important factor that would increase the trust in Moldova between public and governmental institutions?
Well, if to speak about the factors, as I told, doing the right things is the best. And we see that in the countries with the small level of corruption, and I will come back to the example of pandemics and vaccination. So we see the countries with the highest rates of vaccination. Do you think that all these fake news and conspiracies were not spread in northern countries or in Western Europe or in Portugal and Spain and Italy? It is plenty of it there. But anyway, people accept it. To take vaccines, absolute majority of them understood that this is important. Obviously, it includes the level of education and so on, a lot of factors. But what's more important is the discipline in communication. So this is not something fragmentary. Even if you are doing a good thing for the people, you need to find the right way to explain it, because very often public policies are not easy to understand. It's definitely not something exciting which will keep the attention of people. It's not easy to explain what are you doing in the reform of justice system. People want to see results and not the process. But you need to insist. So using the basic instruments of communication, stuff like permanent sociological research, focus groups. So experts are needed, but as I mentioned before, experts and expertise and all these skills and instruments, logistics for communication cannot substitute the actions. Anyway, the actions, the correct actions are the best way to, in long run, to show the good will of the state, in case it really exists. In our region, more specific in Eastern Europe, in the post-communist countries, this specific of the fact that people will keep to remain very, skeptical about any so this expression, I represent the state and I'm here to help you. So okay, so you want something from me, and in the same time this it is very strange how different issues are or say different kind of thinking are combined in the same people, but people want the state to solve their problems. People want to have, this one national leader. On one hand, people don't like. People like to elect. People like democracy in our region. In order, like people like elections, but in the same time, they want, one strong leader, and they trust the leader, but they don't trust the state. So it's a plenty of many times contradictory factors, but in our case, on long run, we need to invest in education. And when I say education, it's not only about the school and university. It's wider, including the education of older generation, not only of the younger generation. Second is the systemic fight against disinformation and propaganda, without affecting the freedom of expression of people and media. It is very important because one of the main effects, especially this is the tool of the Russian disinformation, is not to make people to believe in specific things, but first of all to make people to not believe in anything. So this relativism, people are so don't trust anything, and make them skeptical, and if they are skeptical, they are not able to mobilize to take part in the active life of their society. So that's how the factors, as I mentioned, to do the job, to do the right job, as you promised, in the interest of the people, to use efficient instruments of communication, and third is systemic fight against disinformation and propaganda.
Thank you, Valeriu, very much. I started my day with very interesting conversation.
Thank you, Alina.